Welcome to the Angels Off Day podcast. This is the third off day of the season, April 13th, 2023. My name is Dylan Smith. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm excited to tell you that this Wednesday night, I am feeling a lot better about this team than I was on Sunday night. They lost 2 of 3 to the Blue Jays. Should have been a sweep, probably. The bullpen came in, didn't do their job. And Sunday night, I was feeling pretty down. It was Easter, great holiday, but I was down, man. And the series that they played against the Nationals certainly wasn't perfect, but they did take 2 of 3. A series win is a series win. Not going to complain too much about it. And I'm also not going to overreact too much about the bullpen issues that the Angels are having. Obviously, the starting pitching has been great. We all knew it was going to be great, with the exception of one. You know, he's not going to be named, but hopefully he can figure it out. And the lineup's been mashing. They've been doing their thing. Different guys have been slumping at different times. Renfroe slumped in the beginning. He's heating up a little bit. Trouty's 0 for his last 14. He's Mike Trout, dude. He's going to be fine. As far as the bullpen goes, they say the underlying numbers are good. But, man, anytime a starter gets pulled, I feel nervous. There's not very many guys in the bullpen where it's like, oh, they're going to come in, they're going to get these outs. Hopefully that kind of writes itself out. Good teams can't get by with a bad bullpen. I think Jeff Fletcher put it great on Twitter. He said, they're going to have a top 10 offense, top 10 rotation. The bullpen give me middle of the pack. That's going to be great. So I'm not going to freak out about the bullpen too much yet. I think, we just haven't had enough games to. But if things continue the way they're going, I'll go on a little rant. That's okay. I will say, my big prediction, and I'm putting it on the internet for everyone to hear. I think if the Angels make the playoffs this year's Frankie Rodriguez isn't going to be Ben Joyce, the guy they call up who pitches really well in the playoffs and is that shutdown guy. I don't think it's going to be Ben Joyce. I think Ben Joyce comes up, and I think he contributes to the major league team this year, and I think, he has a pretty good rookie season. But I think if there's a guy that they call up maybe in September, towards the end of the season, who has the stuff to be that shutdown 8th inning guy, I think it's the guy who threw on Tuesday night in Double-A, Victor Medeiros. Man, that guy's filthy. Go look up his stuff on Twitter. Some of the clips they showed, he's got nasty stuff. And I think he's probably going to be a starter in the bigs, but man, imagine him in the 8th inning role. Oh my goodness, with that slider and that changeup that he throws with, pumping 96, 98. Ooh, that's my prediction. I think if they're in contention, I think he's a guy that they potentially bring up and do some pretty good things with. Minor league wise, Zach Neto has looked phenomenal. He went 4 for 5 the other day. He's made I think he made a throwing error on Wednesday, which is today, but he's looked great at the plate. Trey Cabbage is also looking really good at the plate. I think he probably gets called up soon, I would imagine. Everyone says that he hits the ball harder than anyone they've ever seen, and if you hit ball far and you hit ball hard, that's good enough for me. Bring him up. Joe Adell obviously doing nothing but hitting home runs. He's an interesting one. I don't know how I feel about him yet. But yeah, minors. Why I would love to start doing some more minors coverage on this podcast too, just because I think it's fun to keep in touch with the prospects and stuff like that. But yeah, they went 3-3 since the last off day, which gives them a 7-5 record going into this big 17-game stretch that they have going. But we're going to end the podcast with team previews and all that stuff of that entire 17-game stretch that they have. But I am so excited for you guys to be able to hear this interview that I had with the legend himself, Tim Mead. He was the VP of Communications for the Angels and in the Angels organization for almost 40 years. I have not heard a single person who talked to someone who doesn't like Mr. Tim Mead. Mike Trout called him one of his best friends. And usually with these podcast interviews, I have a list of questions prepared and I want to talk to these people about certain things and get certain things out of them. But with Tim, I said, dude, what if we just do like almost a season by season breakdown history of the Angels from when you were there? And so that's what we did. And we just go through season by season. We ended up running out of time and stopping at 2010, which hopefully we'll do a part 2 later. But so you basically get a 30-year history of the Angels from someone who was there and probably the biggest Angels fan I've ever met in my life. Like, I think I can hang with the Angels and the lore, and you bring up a random player like Shea Hillenbrand or Dallas McPherson. It's like, oh, I could hang there. But man, he was pulling out some guys that I just nodded my head and agreed to. I was like, yeah, I know them, and I had no idea. So This is probably my favorite baseball podcast interview that I've ever heard. Whether I'm in it or not, it just fired me up about being an Angels fan and really captures the essence of this podcast. And that's bringing joy back to being an Angels fan. And man, this interview did that for me. I was fired up after this interview. I wore my Mike Trout jersey to work and everything. So I'm so excited for you guys to be able to hear this. I was a little bit sick when we recorded this, but you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to what Tim has to say. So enjoy my talk with Tim Mead. Tim Mead, thanks for joining us, man. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk Angels baseball. I have not met a single person or talked to someone for this podcast who isn't a huge Tim Mead fan. So I'm really excited to geek out about the Angels with you. But let's do a few warm-up questions before we get into it. The first one, what is your biggest hot take involving either the Angels or baseball?
Well, first of all, Dylan, it's a pleasure to be with you today on this podcast, and I appreciate the opportunity. The hot take for me right now as we go into the 2023 season is the rule changes. I just think it's just going to be a different game, or maybe not a different game, a return to the game that we took a little of abbreviation or hiatus from with some of the the analytics and the shifting and all. So I'm excited about a little bit of a return to more offense. Now the question is, when you're going to have that offense, does the philosophy remain in place about no outs on the bases, the aggressiveness, kind of the 2002 style that that Mike Scioscia created with the club and the organization. So I'm excited about it. I think the postseason last year was wonderful. I didn't know about my mind about the expanded playoffs, but I think it worked.
Yeah.
And it's like everything else, we just you have to adjust and let something happen first. And I think it worked out pretty well for baseball. I really do.
Well, yeah, I mean, just look at the Phillies. I mean, we played them in in the middle of the season during the losing streak, and it was like, these guys aren't that good, but they just went on a run, and as a baseball fan, those runs are super fun to watch, and that wouldn't have happened if there was no expanded playoffs. So
absolutely. And go back to the wild card with us. And again, I'll reference 0-2 a few times in this podcast, but with that wild card, because sometimes, as you know, Dylan, being the fan you are, is the clubs that are fighting the hardest toward the end to make something, oftentimes are the clubs that are playing the best baseball.
And then the second one is, what is the worst first pitch that you've ever seen in person? I assume it's at Angel Stadium, but what was the worst one you ever saw in person?
Oh, my Lord, that's a great question. We had a few people bounce it. I don't know. I don't want to embarrass a couple people, but there were some. We didn't have any. The Dr. Fauci? We didn't have anything quite that bad that I recall.
Yeah, no one hitting the cameraman or anything like that.
No, we did in the day though, Dylan. We used to on first pitches have, because it kind of was sponsorship or marketing. We would have a pitcher, a hitter, a catcher, and an umpire, so that 4 people could go out there.
Oh wow!
And I think, if I recall correctly, part of the reason we scaled that back is even though somebody was instructed not to swing the bat, they swung the bat on a first pitch, and I think that was the end of it. So,
was it typically like the leadoff hitter, or was it just like, hey, reliever number 5, go get a bat and stand up there?
No, it was basically whoever the PR guys could pull out of the clubhouse that wanted to go help do it. Now, when Dino Ebel was here, Dino would sit in the dugout for every game and basically handled probably 50-60% of the first pitches, just because he liked to interact with people.
Oh, that's cool.
But a lot of times it's the last guy's up, the last guy in the bullpen, the kid, the rookie. If you have a special first pitch now where you have a celebrity or that person has a connection, Trouty came out and did a few first pitches as well.
For like NFL players, I assume, and stuff like that. People that he thought was really cool.
Yeah.
And then the last one, I don't know if you were this one I usually ask players because they're on the field, and I know you're in the clubhouse sometimes, but was there any ejections that you witnessed in person that were pretty funny?
Well, from the press box, there was a game where Tom Morgan, our old pitching coach, I think when Gene Mauch was managing, Tom Morgan went out and something had happened during the game. I don't recall what it was, but he was thrown out of the game as a reliever was coming in from the bullpen.
Oh, he waits up there, says catcher, stay right here, so he can say something to the umpire.
And it was just one of those ones where he'd had enough. Then there was the game in Baltimore where Doug Rader was thrown out. There was a controversial home run that Mike Devereaux had hit the night before. And if you look at the film, it was foul. Mm-hmm. And Doug was thrown out exchanging lineup cards.
That's awesome.
It's sometimes, Dylan, it's the wording and the phrasing and the conversation you wish you could record to see. It's not always just the magic word, but it's kind of the build up to it. And in Doug's regard, he didn't dance around the subject. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, yeah, all the two ejections that come to my mind that have they recorded the audio are hilarious. When Noah got tossed in the World Series, and then when Earl Weaver's just screaming at that one umpire about being in the Hall of Fame. They're hilarious because you can hear it. But
absolutely. Well, and there's some classic Tommy Lasorda's too.
Oh yeah.
Why do I think the Earl Weaver tape might have been with Bill Howler?
I think it was a taller guy.
Yes, because there was a classic cassette that was going around in the late '80s, early '90s of Martin, Weaver, Tommy Lasorda ejections. And you think about it now, it's not uncommon for people to be mic'd or mics on the field to have access. But in those days, to get some of those conversations, they're really rare.
All right, let's just get into our little history of the Angels talk. So, what year was your first year working with the Angels?
I started as an intern in 1980, and 1980 it was a two-person. Actually, there was three people in the PR department. And obviously, as you know, it wasn't a particularly good year for the club.
But the year before was. The year before was like the first year. The 79 at that point was the best season the Angels have ever had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And first championship. And obviously, it was, Rod was there and they brought in Danny Ford. So you went into the 1980 season with a lot of expectations. But there were a lot of injuries in that season and just a lot of bad, tough performance. And being in that clubhouse, I started, I think it was in late May, early June. For me, I'm 22 years old and it's just like, wow, here you are. But, looking back, what you can recall, there was a certain sense of, this is struggling. And I think if you go back and look at it, there were probably 4 or 5 different catchers, and it was a bad season.
And so then just kind of walk me through. So it was 79 and then the next time they made the playoffs was 82, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
80 after the strike season of 81. And you did say something, your earlier question about ejections. This wasn't an arguing ejection, but in 1981 there was a infamous game with Danny Ford in Cleveland, I believe, and swung the bat, and fortunately the bat broke and some super balls or whatever came out of him. So Danny was ejected during the game, and I got a lot of play and humor in hindsight now. But 81, again, the strike year. So my first full season after the internship, we had a 51-day strike, I believe. And that offseason, Mr. Autry said to Buzzy Bavasi, I want to win again, and it's time.
Buzzy was the GM at the time?
Buzzy was the GM, obviously Billy's father, who later became the GM of the club. But, it's the offseason. We went out and got Reggie Jackson, Doug DeCinces, I mean, that 82 club, Dylan, if you you go with Brian Downey, Reggie Jackson, Freddie Lynn, Carew at first, Gritch at second, Tim Foley, Burleson at short, DeCinces at third, Bob Boone catching. Pitching wasn't all that bad, and to
Nolan
the end,
was still there, right?
Who's that?
Nolan was still there at that
No,
point? No, he was
not
gone.
in 82.
Okay.
No, Nolan left after the 79 season.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, went to Houston in 80. So that 82 club was the thing that I remember about that club particularly is if they scored 3 or 4 runs, they enjoyed, kind of stepping on your piling on a little bit. They finished it off and they could score runs. I think we scored at that time 866 runs or something like that. But it was, and then in the playoffs, take the 2-0 lead in the best of 5 series. We win 2 games in Anaheim. I think it was Earl Weaver and I believe Keith Jackson were doing the series, and Weaver said, "No, this is the Angels. I mean, they're going to go back to Milwaukee and finish us off." We didn't finish it off.
Yeah.
Lost 3 straight, and Donnie Baylor, I believe, had 10 RBIs, and it was just a very disappointing way to end a phenomenal season with as much assemblage of talent as I think the Angels have ever had.
Yeah. And so that season ends. You're around the clubhouse. You're around the players. They didn't make the playoffs from 83 to 86, correct?
Correct. 86 was the next year. 84, I think we were 5 out. 85 went down to the last weekend of the season. Finished a game out. In fact, really 85, 95, even though it's a playoff game, we still finished out of the playoffs by 1 game. And I believe in 15, it was 1 game as well. So, it was a tough time, and there were expectations and there were stardom. And then 86 was a transition from Carew to Joyner taking over at first base. And Wally had that phenomenal rookie year, finishing second to Jose Canseco. But that was a good club.
Yeah. So then this is going to be a common theme of my questions for you, but can you kind of walk me through, like, I'm a big clubhouse culture guy and organizational leadership kind of guy. What was the difference from that 82 team and the way that it was led and the kind of culture in that clubhouse to then missing the playoffs for 4 straight years and then getting back in 87? What was kind of the differences between those seasons? Or is it as something as simple as just injuries and things just not working out? Because from talking to other players, a theme that I'm noticing and that even I process as an Angels fan, history doesn't remember injuries. That those 2010, 2011 Angels teams were good, but there were some injuries, and that's why. Yeah. But to me, they missed the playoffs, so they weren't good. But history doesn't remember injuries, and so what were the differences, or maybe there's similarities in those clubhouses?
Dylan, I'm going to give you a lot of credit because that's something that that's very insightful and very factual. Because first of all, 86 was the next year. So 83, 84, 85, we didn't go. We had a good club in 85. The difference was in injuries and in some subpar performances, maybe a little bit of shortage of pitching. But, unfortunately, injuries fall into if you throw out as a front office person, a player, or whatever, and you say injuries, people immediately go to you're making excuse category. Okay. But it's fact. If the Oilers had lost Wayne Gretzky, you don't replace him. The Angels could not replace Mike Trout during his time last year. And if Shohei, when he was down, you don't replace him. I mean, you put bodies up there, you put guys with full effort. You don't replace those numbers or what they bring or the mindset to the players that know in that bottom of the 8th inning at home or the bottom of the 9th, what would be Trouty's spot. Somebody else is hitting for him now. You're with Mike. It's probably less hope. With somebody else, it's going to be a little bit more hope. So the 82 club was just veterans. It was, to get back to that aspect of the question, it was veterans, really 82 for the most part through 85. Then we started the transition, Wally coming up, Mike Witt had been there. So Mike came in 82, was really one of the younger players. Finley came up in 86. So we were transitioning, but my recollection is we had gamers on those clubs. Sometimes it's just seasons of subpar performance. So I'll get into, I think it was 91, where Finley, Abbott, and Langston win 18, and 19 games, and McCaskill loses double digits. I think it was 17, maybe 17 or 18 games. What happened? Mac was the same pitcher, but it was one of those seasons, and it wasn't all lack of run support. It just didn't happen for him. And sometimes players go through those types of seasons. So I think the clubhouse culture in the 80s was still good. For the most part, these guys got along well. Reggie was at the end of his career and was determined to get the club in a World Series.
So he was kind of a leader in the clubhouse?
I think he was. Before Rod left in 86, he and Reggie were, we had Parker and Winfield in the early 90s. We called them the Twin Towers. But with Reggie and Rod, I just called them the Titans, because you had two future Hall of Famers. And the focus was that two future Hall of Famers could carry you to a championship. And, I look back in hindsight. In fact, I posted something today on being with those two. That was phenomenal, but you still need the surrounding cast. And some of it wasn't, pitching. We had some guys that put up, but it just, and you also had the Kansas City club, at that time, and they're playing some good baseball.
Yeah. How did Gene Autry contribute to that positive culture in the clubhouse? How was he as an owner?
Gene Autry was amazing. Mr. Autry. I will always
Mr.
say
Autry.
No.
I apologize.
No, Dylan. For me, because I work for him. That's why I'm saying it's, it's like the Dodgers will always say Mr. O'Malley. I will always say Mr. Autry. Mr. Autry was a player's owner. The only thing he asked for when he was in that clubhouse, when he came down, was conversation. I never heard him raise his voice. In fact, I tell the story, I think it was 87. I forget what year, but his birthday is in September. So he came down and used to have a birthday cake from the players in the clubhouse that we'd obviously get him and all. And they'd sing happy birthday to him. And Mr. Autry finished and someone said, speech. And he said, well, fellas, I want to thank you very much. I know it's been a tough season. I know some of you aren't going to be back here next year, but I want to wish you and your families a great off season. That's about as critical as I recall Mr. Autry.
Wow.
He loved the game, Dylan. If you were fortunate enough to go in his suite today at the stadium, the pictures in his suite are just as they remain from the year he passed. But there's some pictures with Eisenhower and presidents and ball players, Musial and Williams and others. He loved the game of baseball. When you were around him, he'd come in the office, or sometimes I was fortunate to travel with him to winter meetings. He talked about his baseball experiences much more than he did his Hollywood and his celebrity years as being the singing cowboy. In fact, I had last year I was asked to go to the Autry offices and go through some of his photo albums to identify some of the people that his staff didn't know. And for me, it was a trip down memory lane to sit down there and say, you're looking at the boss's photo albums. There was a lot of Knopp and Fregosi, Finley, Gritch, they were his favorite players. But he had so many photos with just baseball people. And I think my own personal opinion, I think that's when he was at his happiest.
Wow. And then, so he obviously loved baseball. How well did he understand the ins and outs of running a baseball team from the lens of, what was player development like under him? What was, front office culture and executive culture on the team like? How did he run that?
I think from that standpoint, the way the game's evolved, and again, this is one man's opinion, the mechanics behind the game were a little bit simpler or less complicated than they are today. Just simply look at the structure of an organization. So in those days, I think there were a lot of owners that were truly big fans of the game, but allowed their people to do what they needed to do. And that is in no reference to 30 owners today, because the game has become, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. When Mr. Autry owned it, it really wasn't, certainly at that time. So I think he knew what was going on, but even what was happening, you had your scouts, you had your minor league people. I think he entrusted, and we went through some general managers there for a while, even in the early years with the ownership. But he was aware, but I think he just let the folks do their thing.
So yeah, then walk me through 87, lose to the Red Sox.
86
lose to the Red Sox. Oh,
yes.
My apologies. I think that 86 team, in my opinion, is probably the best Angels team of all time, but they didn't win a World Series. So,
Yeah, I'll tell you, and that's always a great debate. I always say this, 86 they had something special about them. I just think kind of who they are, and they had a personality. I will always think that for me, the 82 club was the best talented club. The 02 club, not just because they won, was the best team, because they played, and I'm skipping around here, but they played 27 outs from day one, as hard as any club that I've been around. 89, which really kind of doesn't get mentioned too often.
Did they make the playoffs?
No.
Okay.
No, I think it was 91 wins.
A good team then, if they won 91
games. A great team for a different reason. 91 wins. They had the best personality. On the field, grinders. Off the field is funny and humorous. You had Doug Rader taking over as manager. Burt Blyleven came over, Lance Parrish, Bobby McClure, Glenn Hoffman, catcher Bill Schroeder, and it was a young Jim Abbott's rookie year. So it was a season to watch those veterans. The humor, they truly loved each other. The 82 club just knew it was good. They knew they had a lot of talent. A pitcher short, and maybe a dominant closer short as well. And the 02 club, from start to finish, I always say this, I alluded to the 27 outs, but they were selfless. Runner on second base, nobody out, runners on third, whoever it is in the order, the next guy gets a chance to pick him up for the RBI. And I credit so much of that, obviously, great scouting and player development with those people. But Mike Scioscia, and I know we'll get into that, Mike Scioscia brought in a mindset about starting in 2000, to get over the fear of failure and be aggressive. And I think it just, in those 2000 and 2001, I just think it culminated in 2002 of everything that they had learned and believed in over the course of those 2 years under Mike and his staff. But to get back to 86, I'm in the clubhouse. It's 5-2, top of the ninth. You got 65,000 people on their feet, horses down the left field line out of the bullpens, things that you wouldn't see today. Security people on the field. And the story is objective as the media is supposed to be. People were rooting for Mr. Autry to get to a postseason. and win a world or get to a World Series. He'd been to a postseason. And so I'm in the clubhouse. Gary Pettis is the MVP at that moment in game 5. And ABC had all the scaffolding underneath, and they put the plastic up. I mean, it's 5-2. And I'm in the lounge. Terry Forster, Witter's in there. And you could hear all the noise outside the lounge setting up. And then Donnie Baylor hits the 2-run home run, and Dave Henderson does his thing. And it was, like ants on food at a park to see how fast that they tore that clubhouse down in, I almost want to say seconds rather than minutes, and got out of there. And, the emotion of losing that game, it's still, Dylan, if you ever look it up, Al Michaels, for the greatness that is Al Michaels as a broadcaster, and, his, do you believe in miracles he calls that the greatest baseball game he's ever broadcast. And because it wasn't just the emotion of the 9th inning, it was going into the 10th, and then we eventually lost it in the 11th, and then went back to Boston, obviously, and lost 2 games there. But the emotion, we had to carry that with us for 16 years until we got to 2002. And you just look. I think if you talk to people in the front office, and you'll see players who have had success, who have been part of tough losses in championship games. It doesn't completely erase the success. Doesn't completely erase the memories of what could have been. And I think for anybody associated with the Angels in those years, 86 was something special that just slipped through our fingers.
Yeah. And so then 86 ends. There's that heartbreak. I would assume roughly from 87 to 95 is a period of not making the playoffs, and some of those veterans, like the guys like Reggie, their careers kind of winding down. But then all of these Angels legends are kind of starting to come up into the bigs, the Finleys and the GAs and the Salmons and all those guys. What was that like, not only in the clubhouse, but just as an observer watching something ending while something's also starting, while the team didn't, necessarily make the playoffs or experience a ton of success?
Well, I think that's a great question. We had the Dave Parkers and the Dave Winfields and Eddie Murrays, through those years, and players certainly that were at the last third of their careers. But what they did bring was experience. And, what we can see as a fan or front office person, we're just inclined to say performance. Everything is judgment on performance. But I'll get back to 04, I believe it was 04, 05. Andres Galarraga, at the end of his career coming in. Well, he helped Vladimir Guerrero. He helped Jose Guillen, for a while, but less with Jose, more for Vladdy, because I think Jose had gone through his issue. But what those guys bring in guidance and mentoring and teaching to a young player, they're invaluable. And sometimes some of those players aren't just stars. Some of them are utility players. I'll get to Spike Owen, what he helped. I'll get to John McDonald coming over, forgetting what year in the 2000s. They offer something very special to a young player learning the game. What really Salmon and Garrett and Percy and Benji, Jimmy Edmonds really is indicative of was a great period of time of scouting and player development. And that gets back to Bobby Fontaine, Billy Bavasi. Question really later, Tony Regans. I mean, a lot of the guys Tony had up here when he was or in the major leagues, Tony was the farm director. And it's all those people that most people know no names about. Bruce Hines, who came up and obviously was a coach for his first, then was it 2 years ago? Bruce Hines was so largely responsible for the success of the minor leagues and some of the things he put together. So I look back when I see those names, I look at them not just as major league players, but I look at them as reflective of a system that was really almost at its best.
All right, so let's say we're in the mid 90s right now. Who's the front office manager? And then kind of walk me through Autry sold the team in 96.
Yeah, 96 because we became Edison International in 98.
Okay,
Disney.
so walk me through Autry selling the team, and then kind of what the front office structure looked like before and after. And obviously Disney owned the team, so I'm sure they appointed, one or two guys in a suit to kind of oversee things. But walk me through what that looked like.
Well, I'll give you a perspective. When I started with the front office, I think there were 36 to 38 employees, full-time staff in the building. We drew 2.8 million in 83 after winning in 82. We didn't change staff. I mean, just because of the success and everything that Reggie brought to us. But it was kind of a transition time. Missed the Autrys. In fact, I had a lunch with Jackie Autry last year, and we talked about it. Just had reached the time that Mr. Autry wasn't able to devote, just because of health and age issues, all the time to the club, and a lot of it was falling on Jackie. And you could start to see that the game and the business of the game was changing a little bit at that time. So she sold. There were rumors of the club being moved and all that, whether it was to move locations or go to another city. It's just a lot of speculation. The Angels should never move from where they're at. It's the perfect location and the perfect fan base. But it was a tough time. We went through Whitey Herzog and Danny O'Brien, who are co-general managers. Bill Bavasi took over in 94. I was his assistant for 4 years. And it was a time really of pretty much player development, I think, looking at it. And then we had the strike in 95. We had a close team. On-field personnel, we had, Chili Davis, who I think should always be spoken of more in Angel history than he is.
Him and Howie Kendrick are the two that need
Chili,
more love.
And I'll tell you another one who made a difference, even though he had his own issues. Tony Phillips made some of those young players better too. And you go back and look at that 95 club that we probably overachieved and lost the big lead of 11 and a half, 12 games in the last, with I think 2 9-game losing streaks in the last 42 games. But Tony Phillips made some of those young players better. Rod Carew was a coach on that staff, made them better. But it didn't work out. We had the lead. We had the 1-game playoff in 95. If you go to 90, I don't remember much about 96. 97 and 98, we just had bad Septembers. And Dylan, for not knowing your age, but if you go back prior to 02, there was always that story about the Angel curse, the Angel curse, the Angel's curse. And new players would come in. So every time the club got close to winning, and generally it was September, those were the stories. The great thing about 02 is that put it all behind, more in the past and not a present conversation. But 97 and 98, when we had some couple bad Septembers, those stories came out again and just weren't strong enough to finish it off in some big games and some big series.
99 hits, fires manager midseason, Terry Collins takes over. Or did Terry Collins get fired and someone else took over?
Well, Joe Madden took over for Terry toward the end of the season. Yeah. And at that point, Terry was kind of mutual that Terry was let go and resigned. And then Billy, toward the latter part of September, resigned as well. So there was at one point in that off season that we had no general manager, no scouting director, and no farm director. It was it was a barren wasteland in the baseball front office part of things, and that's when it all changed. That's when the new renaissance of the club came in. With with the hiring of Bill Stoneman. And if you go back and look at it, that wasn't even smooth initially. Bill had come out and then had to come back, and he came back for his second session with the Disney brass. And then Bill brought in a young Mike Scioscia.
Before we get to that, what was it like? How did Disney run the team differently than Gene did?
I think with three owners, they've all been different. Mr. and Mrs. Autry were really kind of, when you look back in comparison, as big as the Autry name was by the game standards today, it was almost kind of a small family ownership. I don't want to say ma and pa business, but it was a small family ownership. Disney brought in corporate and really taught us a lot of business acumen at the time. They gave the fan base a beautiful ballpark with the renovation, because baseball, as cool as it was to have 60,000 plus sometimes in the 80s, on a nightly basis, it could be a downer sitting in, behind home plate looking at nothing in the outfield night after night. I mean, you had 33,000 some nights and it still looked what it was, half empty. But that was good. Disney brought us, we many of us had to work both the Ducks and the Angels for 7 years. And that was challenging. Baseball season's long enough. So there was a lot of crossover. There was a lot of turnover at that time. I think Disney, even going through the sale and going into 2002, Disney's great gift to the Angels, many great gifts to the Angels organization. But towards the end, when they knew that they were going to sell the club, they let, after Tony Tavares left and Paul Pressler took over, they really kind of let the club run itself, while behind the scenes they were looking to sell it and find a buyer. And in 2002, kind of left it alone to let the baseball people just do what they needed to do. And obviously the results are pretty good. And Michael Eisner enjoyed standing on that podium, with the World Series trophy on October 27th.
Okay, so fast forwarding back a little bit, I think a big reason why the Angels won a World Series in 2002 is because they hit on both of their GM and their manager hiring, which, you see, like, teams are looking, it happens in the NFL, it happens in the MLB, they're looking for new guys to run things, and usually you don't know who they are, and very rarely do you hit on both, but that's what the Angels did. Walk me through what Stoneman brought in, and then what that first spring training was like with Scioscia, and maybe how he commanded the clubhouse and how he changed the clubhouse to create that winning culture that lasted 15 years.
Great questions, Dylan. Very good questions. I think ultimately, in my own personal opinion, is sometimes when you make changes, everybody finds themselves comparing to the past and being stuck on what the previous person or administration did. Well, it doesn't matter, because you're not going to change it. You're going to evolve. But I think when Bill and Mike took over, they looked at the present, whatever day their hiring dates were. They focused on that day and where we're going to go. I remember a conversation, generically or generally, where Mike would answer to the media when they'd ask, well, this happened in 99 and that happened. And his point was, I wasn't there, so I can't speak to it. But I can tell you what we're going to be about now. The biggest change that I will give Bill is that, well, a few things. Bill took a chance on Mike. He didn't go find a veteran manager. Bill was player development oriented. He really believed in that very, very strongly. Try to keep it within your system. We had a situation where we used to have to write a prospectus every year about the upcoming season. PR department had to put it out. It's just your PR propaganda about what you thought the club would do. And in that, Mike came in and we had written it, and we used the word, maybe the phrase was something along the lines of hope to compete or look to compete, whatever it was. Mike said, and I think he changed on the field and off the field in the front office with just this simple tweak. He said, I understand last year was tough. I understand you have to write this, but one phrase or one word I generally avoid using is compete. I like to use the word contend, because compete is hoping if everything falls in place, we may have a shot. Contend is a definitive statement. And I watched that evolve throughout the organization, that people started to take the word compete out of their vocabulary, at least, publicly, with the expectations of contending, so that we would walk around even in a season like 03, where we didn't go to the playoffs or, repeat after 02. And we would say, we didn't do our job. We didn't meet our goals of playing game 163, or game number 1 in October. We expected to contend, which meant we expected to be in the playoffs. So when you formulate that mentality and live it, feel it, and believe it, you take on a different persona. And it's not swagger or arrogance. It's your
confidence.
own person. It's confidence, but it's your own organizational expectation. You don't go into battle expecting to hope it all works out. No, you expect to win. Okay, we expected to win. And I think that's one of the greatest, to me, it's Mike's greatest legacy.
Yeah, so you're saying that culture
Culture is the right word.
Yeah, it came from Sosha. He came in and set that culture of don't hope to win, expect to win.
Absolutely. And he and Bill as a tandem believe that. And Bill deferred to Mike's expertise and challenge, and they just worked well together.
Yeah. Can you give me a couple of moves? And I don't even necessarily mean player acquisitions. I mean, for sure, there's like the Edmonds for Kennedy trade. But are there a couple moves that Stoneman made, whether it's hiring people or putting coaches in place or whatever, a couple of moves that the two of them made together that led to the team culminating in a World Series championship?
I think one of the moves was George Fabregas to Cleveland, or to Milwaukee, I believe. I think it was Milwaukee, for Alex Ochoa. Okay, go back and look what Alex Ochoa did defensively for the Angels in 02. Okay, it was just one of those July or trade deadline small moves nobody paid attention to. It also opened the door for Jose Molina to come up. So now you had Benji and Jose catching. And George is a great guy. I love George. But, Jose brought it up a little bit as a backup. And then we got the defensive outfielder as well. And if you look, I believe when Darren catches the fly ball, I believe Alex is in right field. I'm pretty sure that was the case. So, that was important. And then, Mo had a tough time, obviously, as an Angel, and Bill made the 8-year for Mo Vaughn trade, which certainly worked out for us because Kevin had a pretty good season in 02. By the end of the year, though, that starting staff was fatigued. But it became the bullpen that obviously turned over. And ultimately what Bill did was Francisco Rodriguez in September of 02.
After pitching, 3 games?
Yeah, he had a handful of games in September, but they knew when he came up, and that was Bill using the rules. And I think it was, some of the names after a while, Steve Green on the 60-day DL, and we were able to put somebody eligible and sub him out on the roster. And he brought up Frankie, and from the first day that, even the players in that club didn't really know much about him. So when they saw him come up and he was lights out, you got Francisco Rodriguez and Percy, and that was before Scotty Shields was Scotty Shields. That set the trajectory for the organization for several years.
Yeah, Francisco Rodriguez. We're recording this in January, the day after the Hall of Fame ballots came out, but Francisco Rodriguez should be a Hall of Famer, and I will die on that hill.
I tell you, Dylan, I heard more positives and push for him than I had in prior years. I mean, just even in Hall of Fame conversation. So
yeah, he has the fourth most saves of all time. He was an all-star with a couple different teams. He was good for 15 years. Put him in. All right, so I think I would specifically, this is a question I would want to ask anyone from that time period. Walk me through the spring trainings in 2001, 2002, and 2003, where you're coming in 2001 off a losing season. In 2002, you don't know that you're going to win the World Series, but on that field in spring training, you have the World Series winning team. And then 2003, you're coming off of a World Series win. What were the differences in those three spring trainings?
Well, Soch just brought something different. So I'll go for his first year in 2000. It's just new faces. Buddy Black coming in, Ron Renicky. Some of the old time Angels had to get over that a Dodger was managing the club. I heard from a few guys when that first happened. I don't really remember outside of it. Was just like a new chapter in Angels history. And Mike was always very positive. He had team meetings before every day on the field. So he brought those guys together. And again, as I alluded to earlier, 02 was 02 wasn't just 02. It was a culmination of scouting and player development in the late 90s. But I think Mike and Bill bridging everybody together, and then maturity. So there was every spring training, there's 30 clubs that think that first day of camp when they're hugging each other and seeing each other and going and stretching and taking ground balls, hey, this is going to be a special year. And then reality sets in over the course of April through September. But in 03, the great thing is that club, for the most part, remained intact. And 03 was a year where injuries really kind of took us out of it. If you look back, and again, not the excuse, but that group loved each other. And I think they were thankful and appreciative of being together. There was no World Series hangover. It was business as usual, because that's what Soch said. Mike would say things like, that's last year. This is this year. And that's what championship clubs do. I mean, what Bobby Cox did with the Braves. You have a target on your back. And he reminded everybody that, the club that wins the year prior has a bullseye on its back from whomever they're going to play on that schedule. And, you have to rise to that occasion. And that was it. But it was very much new year, new time. We didn't do that victory lap. The victory lap was in October, November, December, and January, at home. But once spring training started, I will tell you, Dylan, people paid more attention to us in 03.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things. History doesn't remember injuries, like we talked about. I don't.
Right.
My recollection of 2003 is that they just weren't as good. But it was just it was the same. I didn't know it was predominantly the same team.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Go back and look. Not that many changes.
And not only was it the same team, but some of those rookies, the Lackeys and the K-Rods, had a season under their belt and had postseason experience under their belt. So the lights are probably a little bit less bright for them that season.
But you know what? You go back, and again, I don't mean to overkill 2002, but the beauty of that group was that there was no former MVP or future MVP. They had no World Series experience. There were no future Hall of Famers on that club. It was about as raw a group, to collectively to go to Yankee Stadium for a division series when Jeter and all those guys, and beat them and give them the one of the worst poundings they've had in their postseason history, and then to just continue that against the Twins and AK having the 3 home runs and the 10-run inning. And then to take it to the World Series, one of the great offensive, that World Series for 7 games was really just 2 heavyweight fighters. And the pitching was getting knocked down. It was just going to be the last guy who could hit hard offensively.
Yeah.
And Garrett Anderson did it in Game 7.
That just reminded me of the World Series, because I've never actually heard anyone talk about this since. That Barry Bonds home run, was it really off of the top of the scoreboard? Was that the farthest hit ball you've ever seen in a game?
Yeah, I think so. And, Bo Jackson's in the All-Star game in '89. Winfield hit a line drive that I think was out in 1.2 seconds. I mean, it was, and if there's no wall back there, I have no idea how far it was going to travel. But I think it was just the majestic swing, the speed and the distance for Bonds. And, obviously it caught the attention of everybody on the field.
Oh, yeah, there's the video of Salmon going, that's the farthest hit ball I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So.
It was. But, the great thing about him is he was challenged at the right time in that series, and he hit the home run in Game 1 off Washburn and the home run off Percy. And he was walked at the right times. I mean, he was who he was. There was respect for him. And then at periods during that series, they challenged him as well. And that's what made that series so good. It just, it was a heavyweight fight.
So yeah, 2003, Artie buys the team at the end of the 2003 season, correct?
Artie was in the process when we won. I think it was May 22nd of 2003. It became official.
Okay, so then walk me through that transition. We are, like I said, we're recording this January, so this is 4 days after he said he's not selling the team. But walk me through that May of 2020 or 2003 and what it was like with him coming in.
Well, we knew we were being sold, but we still had the support of the Disney company as the process was going on, particularly the World Series. We didn't know that Artie was actually in the ballpark, I think behind the dugout during Game 7.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, too. I think he was. I think as the story goes, he was there. I didn't know. I heard that afterwards. But the transition was smooth. Disney just kind of wanted to get out of the business, and then Artie came in, and we had to learn his background very quickly about the outdoor systems and the business. And really, to Artie's credit, and I will say this. There were off seasons, Dylan. I saw less than a dozen Angel hats in Orange County. Off seasons in the 90s, perhaps, and mid 80s. But after we won the World Series, it obviously elevated things. And then you came in, and there was Artie and his crew, really, in the organization, started branding. The billboards that went up, the A's around, so that red, the A, and Angels baseball were dominant. And it was cool to see. I mean, there was a certain feeling being an Angel fan first and foremost, and an employee second for me. A lot of pride in seeing that A out there where you recognized it. And, even to the point where we took it down the 5 freeway and in the Inland Empire and all those things. And it was cool. And, part of the reason the Autries got out of the ownership, the game was changing. The money was changing as well in payroll. And Disney, we spent the money on Mo Vaughn, $80 million in that contract. But I think there were some concerns thereafter because that one didn't quite work out. And you look under those first few years with Artie, Cologne and Kelvin Escobar, and obviously Jose Guillen and Vladimir. We brought in some pretty darn good talent.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question was, as, the PR and communications guy, what was it like adjusting to Artie's splashiness in the off season where it's like, winter meetings come around, we could be signing anybody right now and we need to be ready for that.
It was cool. I mean, again, I'll get back to you're still a fan first. You can work in the front office, but you're still a fan. If you're not a fan, you shouldn't be in the part of it. I mean, you got to care. I have to care the way Dylan Smith cares. You have that something special about it. So for us, it was cool to walk around, and know when you saw some of the big names out there, we may not have been in the inner circle of knowing what the conversations were between ownership and GMs, but you knew there was a chance that we might make an offer, or we might be interested, or we would be listed as being interested in the media, which was fun.
Oh yeah, I bet. So 2004, lose to the Red Sox, which started that strain of losing to the Red Sox a lot in the postseason. 2005, you lose to the White Sox, and just the White Sox being the team of destiny that season, just like the Nationals or anything like that, And because the White Sox only pulled their starter once that whole series, right?
Yeah, 11-1 their postseason. 11-1, yeah, because it was 3 of 5. Yeah, 11-1. Obviously, that's the Przinsky Game 2 in Chicago after we'd won Game 1, which, one will never know. But that almost seemed to be the team of destiny.
Yeah, like they just kind of how the Nationals were in 19. It's just a bunch of veterans who won't be in the Hall of Fame, aren't all-stars that season, but just playing immaculate baseball, and that's just what it seems like the White Sox were.
I tell you, they did something that it's very rare to see, and especially the way pitching set up today, it's going to be even more rare. But that starting staff was almost just seemed like it was just getting out of the gate. They were so healthy and dominant.
Yeah, good for them. The White Sox are a not career. Over the course of their entire franchise, they're a 500 franchise. And so good for them that they got that one in 2005. So 2006 rolls along. Were the Angels, so 2007 was the first season that I fell in love with baseball. So 2006 is the last one that I can't really hang with you on stuff. But 2006, was the team just not as good, or was it an injuries thing? Or because I know they missed the playoffs, the A's won the division, but what was the reason that was the only season from 2004 to 2009 that they didn't make the playoffs?
Some of it was subpar performances, but there was something else in 06. I'm not really, because we had that chance of going 04 through 9 and winning. I really, Dylan, don't recall like a specific reason. I know there were a couple injuries, and I'm really, unless you're just a bad ball club, you're going to say that almost every year.
Yeah.
For good teams, we were a good team. It just didn't play good baseball.
Yeah. Okay. So then 2007 comes along. Little 10-year-old Dylan falls in love with the Angels. I'm a 97 kid. So,
you just made me feel old right there.
Well,
Thank
I do
you.
youth ministry, and these kids, I do middle school, and they're born in 2010. I'm like, oh my gosh, you haven't been alive for the Angels being good. So 2007 comes along. 2007, 2008, they lose back-to-back to the Red Sox. I remember, I don't even know if you know about this, but I had tickets to ALDS Game 3 in 2007, and Ticketmaster misprinted the ticket, and it said ALCS, and I didn't get, we got to the gate, and they wouldn't let us in. And I guess there was a whole empty section right above the press box on Game 3 because Ticketmaster misprinted the tickets. Yeah. So
had no idea.
Yeah, so that's what happened. I was very bummed. Going into 2009, Regan's is still the G. All right, so walk me through Stoneman to Regan's if you can.
Yeah, it's just, I think there's something. I think there's something continuity within an organization, and it doesn't always work this way. So this is going to be my idealism, but I think a good organization always has a successor plan in place. If you run your department, you should hopefully think, who could replace me if I am fired, retired, croak, whatever, something. That's the strength of an organization. And because every time you bring in somebody from the outside, what most people don't realize is the trickle-down effect it has on people all the way down to the equipment manager and rookie baller in the Dominican Republic. Because now you're going to have a new ideology. There's new people going to come in with new thoughts. It's just changing. So Tony had done a great job in the minor league system, and Bill was going to be right there. He knew him. Social loved working with him. So there was a great relationship amongst the trio. And it was ultimately kind of a natural progression, if you will.
Yeah, and Tony, I mean, I obviously wasn't in the clubhouse, but it seemed like Tony kind of was more a fan of those rental trades, like the Mark Teixeiras of the Zach Greinke's of the world, than Stoneman was, where Stoneman was more, let's keep the core together. Is that a correct assessment?
Well, I think Tony, his background was still player development, but some of those rental trades, and if you look at Teixeira, I mean, we did try to sign Mark afterwards, and that didn't work out.
Was that the start of Artie's? Was that the start of Artie's tumultuous relationship with Boris? Was the way the Teixeira thing went down?
I think it was certainly a transaction or a dealing that didn't work out the way that it was desired. I'll say that, but I also think in Tony's regard, or sometimes you look at whether it's Greinke or Mark just before trying to re-sign him, it's almost like with the Dodgers with Scherzer. Sometimes you can make those trades and transactions and help you in the moment and not make the long-term commitment that makes you uncomfortable. So really part of the strength of the position, even like the Dodgers find themselves in, everybody wants to talk about money, but if you have the prospects and the talent in your farm system to be able to get a player that can help you get over the hump once you've established during that year, that season, mid-season, that you're good enough to go to October, now we need this extra piece. That's really one of the keys. It's not so much always the off-season signing. It's what you're able to do when you know what you need. And, you can say, okay, when I say that, I know my detractors would say, well, you need pitching. Well, yes, everybody does. But how is that pitching that you had, that you believed in, going? Are they healthy? Is this guy having a subpar year? What's the bullpen look like? You don't know that. You don't know how it's going to play out. It's almost like right now with the expansion of the playoffs. I was talking about this with some guys in Cooperstown recently. You want to design a club to win a World Series. With playing these series now, it's much more difficult to think this club for 162 is going to just be the same club in the same conditions in October. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, if there was a way to do it, you'd want to design a club that gets hot in September, but there's no way to do that,
Exactly.
So 2009 hits, and that 2009 team was so good. Torrey was there. That was like Torrey, Vlad. Oh no, that was the last season before everyone kind of mass exited. Correct? I know that's not a word, but did it have that feeling of The Last Dance?
I don't know if it had The Last Dance. I think that's a club that people look back and say we should have.
That team 100% should have won the World Series.
Yeah, woulda, coulda, shoulda type season in group. It was dominant. They knew they were good. We had expectations. I think that after you go to the playoffs in 7, 8, and you almost seem to have gotten better in 09 after 7 and 8, you just kind of think, this is it. So from that standpoint, that was disappointing.
So then as a PR guy and as the communications guy, the Angels had kind of a mass exodus after that season. Figgy left, Lackey left, GA left, right?
Yes.
Vlad left.
Over the course of a few years.
K-Rod had gone the season before. How did everyone kind of handle that? How did Artie react to everyone going away? How did Tony react to everyone? What was walk me through that.
Part of it going away, you should say it's what's their own individual situation. Like if you look at the Mariners took Spezio and Sean, okay, and it was their chance to get multi-year contracts. It was their chance to take care of themselves and their futures. In Garrett's regard, it was going to be, couldn't guarantee how many games, and Garrett still saw himself as as an everyday player in essence. I think in Garrett's heart, he wanted to do what Salmon did and start and finish his career as an Angel. I mean, Garrett is as loyal to that club in that organization, much more than I think people really feel. And he and Tim are attached to the hip. You know, I know that was hard on him. You know, people also forget this, Dylan. You know, and this is Bill. Being a GM is just not an easy task. But people forget that Tim Salmon came in his last year as a non-roster player.
Really?
In spring training. He had to earn that spot.
In 2006?
Yep.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So, and then he made the club, obviously, and had one of the most phenomenal send-offs that you could ever imagine, you know, in that last homestand in that last series. But Garrett still felt he could play more. Tim knew he was at the end, and Garrett went to Atlanta and then the Dodgers and finished it. So it was hard seeing some of them go. I mean, that's one of the things where I look at like the Patriots in football, you know, the guys that bring you those Super Bowl champions, and within 2 years, 60, 70% of them are gone. Unless we won't go down the Astros rabbit hole, but look how many are gone from their prior World Series championship. Okay. That wasn't a long period of time. So, you know, we as fans want it to be forever. The reality of the game is, you know, Mike Trout forced Torrey Hunter into right field because Mike Trout was coming up. Wally Joyner forced the club to make a decision on Rod Carew. Okay. That just happens. Frankie Rodriguez forced the club to make a decision on Troy Percival. That's just inevitable, and the Angels aren't unique to that situation. We may emotionally not like it, and then in hindsight, some of those moves don't work out because there's nobody with a perfect record. But that's the reality of sports.
Yeah, we kind of are past 2002 right now, but in talking about the guys like GA and Salmon, you said, I mean, I've never thought about it this way, but you mentioned how those guys waited 15, 16 years before even making the playoffs. And so for them to be able to end, for like Salmon to be able to end well and win a World Series is really cool.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, Timmy came up and his rookie year was 93. So he had 9 years. I mean, the organization, it was a 16-year run. Here's a great story of when you win a World Series, it changed after Tiffany had the exclusive contract with the trophy for the clubs. I think we were second one that got the trophy you see in the case, the way it is. But players could buy a replica that was 75% size of the original. Tim and Garrett are the only two that bought it.
Really?
Yep.
So we're going to, if you're listening to this, save this in the bank, because I have 2 questions I want to ask you at the end of this, and I'm going to get on a soapbox a little bit, but all right, those guys kind of leave. My opinion, one of my soapbox things is at the start of the Angels kind of going downhill as far as the product on the field is when Eddie Bain got fired. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but I mean, yeah, how do you feel about that?
Eddie was a phenomenal scouting director, and certainly if we've had Rick Wilson, a couple other gentlemen who've worked tirelessly. If you get to watch what they do with their scouting departments, but certainly the results have not been there as consistently as when Eddie was in charge. And, you know, our long-term performance kind of bears that out.
All right, well, I know you got to go. So my 2 questions for you before we leave are more me getting on a soapbox and just wanting to know things about the Angels and why things are the way they are. And this is something that seems so not important, but I'm super passionate about it. Why are there not more retired numbers up there?
Retired numbers is something, and I would tell you this, when I was with the club, obviously the ones that come to mind for you are going to be Salmon and
I have
and
5.
Garrett.
5 in mind that I think need to be retired.
Let me see how close I am. Salmon, Garrett, Erstad,
Mm-mm.
Percival, Frankie,
maybe 6
and
then.
Tanana.
Maybe 6 then. I think, and this is why I'm so passionate about it, I don't think you can tell the story of the Angels. Like, all the people that come in town to see Shohei and Trout and all this, I know when I go to a ballpark, I look up at the retired numbers, and like, I live in San Diego, so I go to Petco. They have Hoffman and Gwynn and Winfield, and you look up there, you see the story of the Padres. I don't think you could tell the story of the Angels without Downing's number 5,
Okay,
without Salmon and Garrett, without Finley, without K-Rod, and without Weaver. That's my opinion.
Okay, look, I should have thought about that deeper on those names. Downey would have been my first. But let me ask you, what is the 3 players in the Padres have in common that you just mentioned?
They're Hall of Famers.
Okay. When I was with the Angels and that conversation came up all the time about Salmon, my successor in Cooperstown was Jeff Idelson. He's been a friend for 35 years. And he said there's a reason for 5 years between retirement and eligibility. Okay. Part of it is the emotional part. Okay. Go back and look. And if you go down and look at most Hall of Famer or most retired numbers, they are either Hall of Famers, dominantly Hall of Famers, or peripheral Hall of Famers, that they were strongly considered. Okay. There's a difference between the Hall of Fame in the organization, which tells a story. Okay. Like Gubazza is in the Royals Hall of Fame, but his number is not retired. Okay. A number retired is almost just, again, that peripheral to be a Hall of Famer in the game. And that's something. So what I would challenge you to do, go back and look at retired, look it up on Google a little bit later. Look at retired numbers in the organizations, and then look at the common denominator. The other thing is, when you look at the Yankees, they've come in even under some criticism in recent years with some of the numbers they've retired, because it's not DiMaggio and, all these other, some of them. So retired numbers, it's almost, the Hall of Fame is 1, a retired number is 1A. I mean,
okay. So I've been misinterpreting it then a little bit.
The Hall of Fame in Cooperstown is 1.
Yeah.
A retired number on the club level is 1A.
So for me, wanting to sit in the stands looking up and those numbers up there telling the story, most teams use that as the team Hall of Fame is right. The way that it tells a story. And then
which should be more prevalent in organizations.
I guess that's what I honestly, I've been an Angels fan for 15 years, going to 10 plus games a season. I don't even know if I could tell you where the Angels Hall of Fame is off of memory, And so I just wish that it was, there's some sick things that have happened in Angels history, and I want them to be highlighted,
Couldn't agree with you more.
So cool. We're running out of time, so I'll save my other question's not that important. So Tim Mead, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. It was fun just going through the Angels, man, and talking to someone who's just a massive Angels fan and was there for a lot of it.
Well, Dylan, I appreciate it. And this conversation was definitely is fan to fan. You love him, and I think we all want to see him. We all want to see him back in October. We want to see Trouty in Shohei, but I want to see Jeff Fletcher. Jeff Fletcher. No, Jeff Fletcher can write about him. I want to see David Fletcher playing, yeah. And I want to see those young kids, because the earlier you taste it in your career, I think the hungrier you remain throughout your career.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's that. I hope they have that taste in October.
Man, what a fun interview with Mr. Tim Mead. I thought I was a big Angels fan, and then just getting to talk to him, that really just embodies the heart of this podcast, and that's just bringing joy back to being an Angels fan. As you could tell, we ran out of time when we got right after 2009, so he did agree to come back and do a part 2 later this season to kind of go through 2010 to now, which I'm really excited about. The Angels have they're probably their biggest test of the season coming up now. They don't have an off day till May 1st, and they're playing some good teams in there. first team they play is the Boston Red Sox. They go up there for a 4-game series. Typically, I'll do pitcher matchups, but with just the weird pitching rotation the Angels have, and just you never know what can happen, I won't do pitcher by pitcher matchups, but instead more so just team matchups as a whole. So the Boston Red Sox this season, they are 5-6 as of Wednesday morning. They're 5-6. They're batting .240 as a team at home, which is where we'll be playing them. They're 2-4. They're batting .261 at home. They've hit 8 home runs with an OPS of 777. Against lefties, which is who they're all going to be facing for the most part, they're batting .243. They've struck out 38 times, 136 plate appearances. 703 OPS compared to a 768 OPS versus righties. So they're somewhat consistent. As far as the batters on the team, the good news for us is that they have a lot of lefties, and lefties are a lot of their main hitters. Rafael Devers is obviously going to be Rafael Devers. He's batting .283, 935 OPS. Verdugo is batting .318, 816 OPS. Yoshida, the new guy, he's batting .216 with only 1 home run, but I'm sure that's just an adjustment period. Adam Duvall is actually leading the team in average at .455, but he's hurt and won't be playing in this series. They also have Kike Hernandez. He's batting .083, not having a great time. Christian Arroyo is batting .176. And Justin Turner is batting .205, but we know how he hits against the Angels, so, you can never count him out. I think they haven't announced the probable pitchers yet, but I think it's going to go Sandy on Friday, Tyler on Saturday, and Reed on Sunday, and then Shohei on Monday playing that 8 a.m. Pacific time game. Shohei, he's earned the right for us to not have to worry about him. And as far as the 3 lefties, I like this matchup. Obviously, Devers, Verdugo, Yoshida. Those guys are lefties. The main boppers in the lineup are lefties, so it's good for us. Obviously, there aren't huge splits between the two, but just that lefty on lefty matchup helps anyways. As far as the pitchers that it looks like we're going to be facing, it looks like Tanner Houck is going to be on Friday against Sandy. He's 2-0 with a 4.5 ERA. On Saturday, it'll be Tyler against Nick Pivetta. Nick Pivetta has looked very good, 2 starts and a 0.9 ERA. And then as far as Sunday goes, I think it's going to be Cutter Crawford, 9 innings pitched, and he is at a 8 ERA, so he's allowed 8 runs in 9 innings. And then I believe on Monday it'll be Shohei against Chris Sale, which should be fun. Chris Sale is he's had a rough season so far. 2 starts, 10 runs, and 8 innings pitched, good for an 11.25 ERA. So not great. As far as the bullpen goes, they did add Kenley Jansen to be their closer. He's had 2 saves so far. Richard Blyer is in the bullpen as well. He's pitched 4 innings, 4.5 ERA. Yeah. This guy Josh Winkowski, he's pitched in 5 games, 9 innings pitched, and he's allowed 1 run. So he's looked great. 8 Ks. So he's got an 8 K through 9. I would imagine that if we knock a starter out early, we're gonna face this guy, and he's looked good so far this season. As far as anybody else, Ryan Brazier, former Angel, he's gotten roughed up a little bit this season, but all their other relievers look like they've been doing a pretty good job. So as far as this Red Sox series, I don't know. We always play the Red Sox weird, especially at Fenway. It's a weird series where we play an 8 a.m. game and a 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time game. I think the safe bet is to say they split it. If I had to bet, I would say they probably win. They probably win Sandy's start and Shohei's start, and lose the Saturday-Sunday game. The problems they've been having with their hard contact and stuff might get fixed a little bit at that ballpark. Obviously, I can't count how many times that Renfroe and Trout and all these different guys have just hit line out straight to left field, and maybe they bounce off the monster. Who knows? But I think the safest bet is 2-2, but they very well could easily get swept or, go 1-3. And there's also a chance that they can, go 3-1 or something like that. But 2-2 is what I am hoping for in my heart. Next up on the 17-game stretch of games that they get the New York Yankees in New York for 3 games. We all remember that Yankees series last year, right on the beginning of that 14-game losing streak after the Blue Jays series. It was a rough series. I remember I was in Vegas watching all those games, and it was just nothing but pain. But hopefully this series can go better. The Yankees this season are 7-4 as of Wednesday morning, batting 253 as a team, 17 home runs, so a lot more power than the Red Sox do. But at home, they're batting 245 with 11 of those home runs. So Yankee Stadium ballpark, of course, that's where they get most of their home runs. Here's what intrigues me. Against lefties this season, they are batting 205 with a 632 OPS. Granted, it's only in 73 at-bats compared to 287 at-bats against righties. But against righties, they're batting 265 with an 821 OPS. So what I could see happening, obviously Shohei pitches a Monday game, then they got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday against the Yankees. I could see it being that Tuesday game goes to Tucker Davidson instead of Griffin Canning, especially if this start doesn't go amazing on Monday or on Wednesday against the Nationals, unless Griffin, 7 shutout innings or something like that. I could see them going with a Tucker Davidson start on the 18th, and then Sandy and Tyler on the 20th, since that team doesn't hit lefties as well as they do righties. So if you look at their stats, Aaron Judge is being Aaron Judge. He's batting 341, 1075 OPS, 4 bombs. Gigi LeMahieu, 263, 833 OPS. Glaber's having a great season. He's batting 371 with an 1179 OPS. Rizzo's 314. Giancarlo's 278. They're hitting well. Volpe's obviously 129. He's struggling. The 2023 Rookie of the Year runner-up to Logan O'Hoppe. But a lot of righties in the lineup, so it's interesting that they don't hit lefties very well. But the stats show what the stats show. Maybe they've just faced some good left. Pitching-wise, Garrett Cole, 1-4. Nestor, 261. Domingo Herman, 587. They're looking good. Starting rotation-wise, Clark Schmidt's had a rough time. I don't know who's going to be pitching against them for this. But as far as bullpen goes, Clay Holmes, 386. They're just a good team. They're a playoff team last year. I don't know how it's going to go against the Yankees. I wish I could say I think it's going to be 2 of 3. I do feel good about throwing 3 lefties if that's what Phil decides to do. But I think the best we can hope for is 2 out of 3. But expect 1 out of 3. It's on the road. It's in Yankee Stadium, different time zone. So I'm going to go ahead and say that they go 1-2 against the Yankees in this series. All right, next up, we will get 3 games against the Kansas City Royals at home. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And this, to me, is one of those trap series for the Angels. If you remember last season, the Royals weren't good, but they did take 2 of 3 against the Angels. Or maybe they swept them. Either way, that was the game that Shohei pitched, and then they lost. And then also, they just let up all those the bullpen blew the game. I remember that game very vividly. Shohei did the Tungsten Armo Doyle thing. But this season, the Royals are not looking hot. They are 3-9 as of Wednesday morning, batting 190 with a team OPS of 575. So they're Angels 5 through 9 of last year's stats is this whole lineup. Against lefties, they're batting 189. Righties 190. OPS is about 60-point difference, but this team is not very good at hitting. And then at pitching, they are not very good at pitching either. They have a 4.56 ERA, and they are again 3-9 as a staff. Hitting wise, Bobby Witt, he's there. We know Bobby Witt's awesome, but he's only batting 186 this season, but we know he plays great defense. Salvi's batting 238. Vinny Pasquantino is batting 289, so that's good. MJ Melendez, 162. The next highest batting average is good old friend Matt Duffy. He's only had 17 at-bats, but he's 7 for 17 this season with 1 home run and 10 total bases. So Matt Duffy, of course, he leaves the Angels, and he's great. Pitching-wise, Jordan Lyles, good old innings eater. He's had a 5.19 ERA this year. Zach Greinke 3.31. Brady Singer 4.91. And Brad Keller's at a 2.61. So Brad Keller's looked great. Interested to see. I don't know how the pitching lineup is going to wrap up. Future Angel Scott Barlow has had a 7.36 ERA this season. So I think it'd be great. Maybe has a stinker of an outing against the Angels, and they tell him, hey, just stay at Angel Stadium and just learn to throw a good slider like the Angels are good at teaching. This series should be a sweep. It looks like Shohei's going to line up to pitch that weekend. Should be a sweep, but with this team and playing bad teams, they could very easily go 2-3 or 1-3. But I'm going to hope and I'm going to predict that they get hot after playing some good teams and that they sweep the Royals. Next up is a 4-game series against the Oakland A's, a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We've seen the A's before. We know that they're not good, and we know that we always find ways to lose to this team. Since we last saw them, they are 2-9 on the season. If you follow Athletics Rants on Twitter, he is saying that they're going to break the run differential record because they don't know how to pitch and they can't hit. So we know Oakland. I don't need to talk a whole lot about them, but it is the Angels playing the Oakland A's, and they do find ways to lose to them. I'm going to go out and just predict that they split the series. I know I just said they sweep the Royals and they're hot, but it's the Angels playing on weekday nights at Angel Stadium. I just don't trust it. I'm going to go ahead and predict that they go 2-4. Everyone but Shohei, I think, is going to pitch, and I think it's a 2-2 kind of situation. I think they split it. Lastly, we end this long stretch of games with a 3-game they're playing 3 games in Milwaukee. I don't think it's a road trip. I think they have an off day in there, but they get 3 games at the Milwaukee Brewers. And so far, the Brewers look really good. They are 8-3 on the season, batting .260 as a team. ERA-wise, they have a 2.51 ERA as a pitching staff. We know the Brewers have good pitching. Hitting-wise, Christian Yelich is batting .227. Unfortunately, that might just be the new normal for him. Willie Adames batting .300. Garrett Mitchell's batting .324. Brian Anderson's at .303. Joey Weimer, .242. Let's see. William Contreras is batting .310. I did not know that he was on the Brewers. Jesse Winker, good old friend, batting .308. Again, Luke Voigt's on the Brewers. Didn't know that either. Pitching wise, Corbin Burns, I know just the other day, or I think Tuesday night, threw a very good game, but his ERA is still at 5.19 because he got hit hard in the beginning. Freddie Peralta is at a 0.75. Brandon Woodruff, who is hurt, I don't know if he'll be back in time by the time they play them. That's in a couple weeks, but he had a 0.79 ERA. Wade Miley, who the Angels can never hit, is at a 2.45 ERA. Mr. Michael Nelson Trout is 1-for-18 in his career against Wade Miley, so here's the hoping we don't have to face him. And other than that, the Brewers seem to be playing pretty good. They're pitching well. They're hitting about how you would expect them to. It's a 3-game series at the end of a long stretch of games on the road. And the Angels, who knows what their hitting is going to be like by then. Do we want to just play it safe and say they take 2 or 3, especially if Shohei pitches that game, at one of those games? I think that's safe to say. So yeah, let's say they take 2 or 3 against the Milwaukee Brewers. Whew, okay, that was a long marathon of previewing teams and games. Let's take a look at that whole stretch and see where we think they'll be. We said Red Sox, there's a 4-game set. They split it. That's 2-2. Yankees, they go 1-3. That puts them at what, 3-4? 3-4. They sweep the Royals. That puts them at 6-4. Split 2 against the A's. That's 8-6. And then the Brewers, if they take 2 of 3, that puts them at what, 10-7? Which, banking on the fact that they win on Wednesday, obviously I'm recording this before the game, but you never know with Mackenzie Gore throwing against the Nationals. I hope I sound like an idiot in this, but if they win today, they go 7-5. That puts them at 17-12 at the end of the first month of baseball, which I would say is a great place to be. The AL West has been struggling so far, so I don't think there'd be a whole lot of separation between them and another team that's way ahead of them. So I think if they can be somewhere in that 15-17 win range at the end of April when we see each other again on May 1st, that would be good enough for me. But this has been a long episode. Thank you so much for listening. If whatever platform you are listening to this on, if you could go leave a 5-star review, that would be awesome. Please follow me on Twitter at Angels Off Day Pod. I live tweet a lot of games there and complain about things. The season's not falling apart yet, which is great. So much thanks to Tim Mead for doing this interview with me. But this has been a really long episode. So thank you so much for listening, and go Halos. And just remember, it could be worse. We could be Mariners fans.